Conversation, the Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, for months now, we've heard the Remain camp telling us that if we were to leave the European Union on WTO rules, or what they call no deal, that it would be a disaster for our country, terrible for jobs, bad for businesses. We would fall off the edge of a cliff. That's the terminology we've heard time and again. And one of the criticisms of the Leave camp is they've not been clear enough in what they see as an alternative, particularly since Mrs May put the Chequers plan on the table. Well, today there was an attempt to do something about that. A group called Economists for Free Trade, who include people like Professor Patrick Minford, Roger Bootle, Tim Congdon, names like that, and with an advisory board with some really big names on it, James Dyson and some of the biggest industrialists in the country. So it is a very valid organisation. They today held a press conference in the Palace of Westminster, and their star political speaker was one Jacob Rees-Mogg. And the whole point of this conference was to say, look, we find Chequers unacceptable. There is nothing to fear from the World Trade Organization. Here was Jacob Rees-Mogg this morning.
What is the best way to achieve a deal? Is it to be snivelling and fearful and timorous and give the impression to the European Union that we will do whatever they say, that we will kowtow, we will go down on bended knee, we will offer to serve homage to the great power that there is within the European Union? Or do we go out there boldly and say, actually, our best economists, and several of them are in this room, say that we've got nothing to be fearful about. We don't need to pay homage to you. And don't you think that we should judge by their fruits? Because we all know Andy Haldane, that great figure at the Bank of England, one of the really proper people at the Bank of England, pointed out that most economic forecasts are wrong. So what I'm saying is not that you should accept every detail of this forecast, not that it will be precise, not that in 15 years' time it will be 1.1 trillion that we've made when you combine it all together, but it will be in that direction.
There is nothing to fear from leaving on WTO rules. Do you agree or disagree with what Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Economists for Free Trade group has set out this morning? So tell me if you think actually it would be a disaster, we would fall off the edge of a cliff. Call 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think, do you know what? Freed of all this EU red tape, WTO rules, we'd open up to a bigger, wider world. It'd be a good thing, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think, as I certainly do, that it could be the only way to deliver Brexit, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage on LBC at LBC. Watch us on Facebook. I'm live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. You know, Brexit is not just about economics. There are certain things the government has to deliver to match the expectations of Brexit voters. We have to have control of our borders. We have to have the supremacy of our courts. And we absolutely have to have the ability to make our own laws. I don't think anyone could disagree that that is what Brexit voters wanted. The trouble is, the Chequers deal that Mrs May wants us all to sign up to means that we will not be making our own laws because we will be in regulatory alignment with the rest of the European Union, or, as they've now rephrased it, a common rule book, because that doesn't sound quite so bad. The European Court in Luxembourg will continue to have jurisdiction, continue to have a say, and so far there's nothing in Chequers about control of our borders whatsoever. So, WTO would deliver all of those things. The question is, economically, would we be worse off or better off? Well, it would mean that our goods would be charged a tariff for going into Europe, but in turn, European goods coming into our country, we would charge tariffs on. In fact, net, we would charge them more tariffs than they would charge us tariffs, of course, because they sell us more than we sell them. My view, and it was articulated very well yesterday by Roger Bootle in the Daily Telegraph, is that if we make it absolutely clear to Brussels, look, we're happy with WTO. We've got no problem with that at all. Actually, do you know what? China trades with you on WTO rules. America trades with you on WTO rules. And they're kind of selling a lot of goods and services into Europe. We've got no problem with this. If we did that, they would actually come running after us, demanding a Canada-style free trade deal, which, of course, would be, in many ways, easier than going to World Trade Organization rules. So I take the view, not only is there nothing to fear, but unless we're prepared to go down this route, we will not be able to deliver control of our borders, supremacy of our courts, and the ability to make our own laws. That's how I feel about this. I want to know how you feel. And as I say, that criticism of Leavers, that perhaps since Chequers they've not been giving a single message, is, I think, a valid criticism. Note that when Jacob Rees-Mogg was speaking today, who was sitting in the room, listening and nodding? Chap called Boris Johnson, along with Ian Duncan Smith. There is now a coming together of those who really want to leave around this plan. Let's go to Chris in Richmond. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Nigel. A couple of points I wanted to make. Number one, Patrick Milford is the same person that was telling everyone 20 years ago that the minimum wage would destroy billions of jobs, so he's not a particularly credible source. Secondly, James Dyson is the person that moved his factory from the UK to Malaysia, creating jobs in Southeast Asia rather than the UK.
Well, hang on, Chris. He is a global businessman, and he does and hang on, and James Dyson does provide significant jobs in this country and has paid an awful lot of tax in this country.
But he's exported thousands to Malaysia.
Yes, and one of the reasons he's done it, do you know one of the reasons he's done it? He's done it because of European Union rules on what vacuum cleaners are capable of doing, and he can't make them in our country because of EU rules, so he's gone to Malaysia to do it. In fact, he is living proof in many ways of why European Union rules have been bad for British industry.
Right, so it's okay then, so we take that argument a little further. So we leave the European Union, we don't apply their rules on vacuum cleaners. How are we going to sell vacuum cleaners to the European Union if we don't stick to their rules, Nigel?
Oh, well, if you sell a good anywhere in the world, you have to meet their specifications. But the fact that to sell to them, we have to meet their specifications, does not mean our entire production of what we manufacture and sell in our country and to the rest of the world has to abide by their rules. And here's my point, Chris.
Of course it does.
Here's my point, Chris. Chris, here's my point. All right, of the total UK economy, 12% of it is the manufacture of goods and services that we sell to the European Union. I am not for one moment saying that is not an important part of the British economy. It is. What I'm arguing is it's wrong for the other 88% of our economy to have to abide by European rules when they don't sell any goods there.
Well, I mean, the WTO rules are fine. You want WTO rules. What about services? 80% of our country is services. So a Canada Plus deal does not deal with any of those options, and certainly WTO. The point about Canada Plus is that it will be a Canada deal, plus a deal of some kind on services. The honest truth, Chris, is, we're 35 years into the European single market, and as it stands today, British financial services find it very difficult, for example, to market British insurance products in Germany. So the European financial services market has never been completed. Of course, there are trade-offs and compromises. So Jacob, sorry, Nigel, why is it then that Jacob Rees-Mogg is now setting up an operation in Ireland post-Brexit, and John Redwood is advising people, his own clients, to invest money outside the UK? I mean, there's so many double standards and hypocrisy on this whole thing.
A lot of these people, I mean, listen, don't think of Brexiteers as being little Englanders. They're not. Brexiteers actually, no, they're the globalists. They're the globalists. I mean, one of the things, Chris, that actually made me a Brexiteer. Hang on. One of the things that made me a Brexiteer was realising, firstly, that we not only have a big UK economy, but secondly, there's a great big world out there, and Europe is a diminishing part of it. Chris, let me ask you a question, because you've asked me half a dozen. Let me ask you a question. What is it you fear from a Brexit on WTO rules?
Well, it's just mad. I work in the pharmaceutical industry.
What is it you fear?
Everything, because I work in the industry that ships goods to you single every year.
I'm losing your line, Chris. I'm going to have to let you go, not because I didn't want to listen, I did, but I'm going to move on to Wendy, who's calling from Woodlands in Hampshire, a new caller to this show. Wendy, do you fear a Brexit on WTO rules, or is Jacob right to say there's nothing to fear?
Could I first say Nigel, or St. Nigel, as you're known in our house? You've got the patience of a saint with some of the people who call up.
But that's what democratic debate is, and it's very important. And it's very important to listen to the other side of every argument.
Background: I'm a grandmother of 7 in my 70s. When I voted for Brexit, it really wasn't going to make a lot of difference to me which way the vote went. I voted out for the future of the country as I saw it, and for my children and grandchildren. And of course, like everyone else, I'm fed up with hearing I didn't know what I was voting for when the government leaflet told us quite clearly what we were voting for. And to be honest, I was amazed that we won. I obviously listened too much to the BBC. But I've been constantly frustrated by these people trying to thwart every turn, trying to get some kind of a deal. And I've got to the point now when I'm sick to death of it. And I really would like a no deal just to give the blinking European Parliament a bloody nose, pardon the expression.
Well, Wendy, I promise you, if we announce we are leaving on WTO terms, and of course we've got to sort out, border issues, flights, etc. Of course we have. But if we tell them we're leaving on this deal, they will come running down the corridor after us, because German industry will be bashing Angela Merkel and Juncker round the head and saying, get back to those British and get us some kind of a sensible Canada plus deal on goods and services.
But we should have done it a long time ago.
Well, Wendy, we are where we are. We are where we are. None of us. None of us thought that Mrs. May would come up with that Chequers deal. Inspired by her civil service. But it's so awful that I think now we are seeing a genuine fight back against it. And I think what happened today with those economists and with Jacob, with Boris there in support, I am 100% behind it. And I'm from a different political party.
Short of going out on the street with a placard, what can I do as an individual to try and get this solution?
Well, we have a situation, Wendy, where fewer than a quarter of our MPs supported Brexit. That's where we are. Yeah. The first thing you can do is, and I want people to do this, and one of the reasons I go back out on the road, I want people to lobby their MPs and to say, if you betray the Brexit I voted for, I will never vote for you again. There's a start. Wendy, I thank you very much indeed for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It is now 6:15. Jacob Rees-Mogg and a group of senior economists are telling us there is nothing to fear from going on to World Trade Organization rules with our trade with the European Union. I'm asking you, do you fear it? Is it perhaps the right thing to do and the only way of delivering a very clean Brexit? But something today that really did fascinate me and get me scratching my head about this government and what direction they want to take us in. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, speaking today in the House of Commons, responded to a question from the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Nicky Morgan, about what was going to happen with the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney.
I can now announce to the House that I have been discussing with the Governor his ability to be able to serve a little longer in post in order to ensure continuity. And I can tell the House today that the Governor has agreed, despite various personal pressures to conclude his term in June, that he will continue until the end of January 2020 in order to help support continuity in our economy during this period.
I mean, the Governor of the Bank of England was as bad as George Osborne during the referendum, telling us it would all be a disaster, telling us ever since the referendum we've done the wrong thing, it's catastrophic. He's a Remainer, an unrepentant Remainer. He hasn't even attempted neutrality in that job as Governor of the Bank of England. And here we get the Chancellor of Her Majesty's government telling us that his term will be extended. How on earth can we take this government seriously when they say Brexit means Brexit if they keep this man unnecessarily in his post? Any thoughts on that? Please text to 84850. Back to Jacob Rees-Mogg, back to World Trade Organization rules. Is there anything to fear? Callum is a new caller from Moray in Scotland. Callum, good evening.
Good evening. I'm very interested in your description of senior economists behind this proposal, but I'll just carry on with some of the facts. Well, Nigel, it's a nice evening here.
All right, well, Callum, hang on a second. Are you saying these are not senior economists?
I'm saying they're not in the majority, but let's not worry about that.
I didn't say they were in the majority. What I said is these are well-known economists, many of whom have done big jobs for British governments in the past. Doesn't mean they're right, Callum. Doesn't mean they're in a majority. But the point I was making, and I hope you'll agree with me,
is that Economists for Free Trade are a valid, legitimate organisation.
I think we could disagree on that. But let's talk about what you've asked about, which is about world trade options and what that would actually mean. So your proposition is that we'll gamble by saying we'll go to World Trade Organisation options and then they'll give us a better deal. So let's go through what a World Trade option would actually mean for the whisky industry in Scotland. Okay?
Okay.
That would mean a 40% tariff being applied to all luxury goods, which would mean for a £200 bottle of whisky, an £80 customer cost. Okay, so that's the first step.
So Callum, on the whiskey, on the whiskey, how much of overseas whiskey is sold to the European Union?
30% of a £4 billion industry for a single company. So you're talking about a substantial, more than your fishing industry, Nigel, I think you'll find. But if you'd let me finish, because this comes on to a much wider point. The point is, we would then be hit by that tariff of a luxury good. So one way around that would be to produce those luxury goods, but not package them as a luxury item until they enter the EU, where we would avoid a vast majority of that tariff. What that would effectively mean that if you've got a luxury good in this country, you would actually be better off, even if you're producing in this country, to not package it as a luxury good, take the tariff at a lower rate, and package it in a foreign country, i.e. Holland, etc. And that is what the WTO tariff will make us do. And that isn't a scare story. That 40% tariff has an immediate impact on jobs in Scotland, particularly packaging jobs, logistics jobs, everything else. And then the next part of that is, under WTO rules, we'd still have that tariff to play on all the other countries we wouldn't have an agreement with. So the easiest way to then export that whisky into other countries would be from where? From Europe.
Isn't the argument, Callum?
The other 70% of our industry would then be exported from Europe because it would be easier for us to do it.
Isn't the argument, Callum, isn't the argument here that, I mean, you talk about whiskey exports. I mean, Japan has been a very big market for whiskey exports. You know, the Swiss did a free trade deal with Japan many, many years ago. We, outside of the European Union, could have done that a long time ago to the benefit of your industry.
Well, actually, right now, you're talking about going to WTO rules, and WTO rules are 40%. So if you want to talk about having a better free trade deal than the current EU deal, I'm happy for you to find one out there in the wider world, because so far, no lead representative has. But if you are talking about WTO rules, I've explained exactly how one small industry would be affected. I'm not going to take up any more of your time, so I'm sure you've got lots of recallers.
No, listen, Callum, and I know in your part of the world the whiskey industry is very, very important indeed. Thank you for making your points. And hey, you know something? Whenever you make a change in the short term, there will be winners and losers. Of course there will. But how on earth, folks, how on earth do we deliver a Brexit that gives us control of our borders, supremacy of our courts, the ability to make our own laws? Chequers did none of those things. I'm perfectly happy. I'd love us to do a Canada Plus deal, but I don't think we're going to get to that unless we say we're prepared to go WTO first. That is my view. And that, I think, is how business negotiations go. Not something I suspect the Prime Minister is particularly good at. That's my view. Stuart in Romford says, I would rather have WTO any day than the Chequers betrayal. Well, that really is what Jacob and Boris actually are saying. Shirley says, I wish we could just leave on WTO rules instead of all this scaremongering and waiting for the EU's decisions. I work for a Jaguar Land Rover supplier. I don't believe any of it. Well, Shirley, there are many that say actually business is business and the whole thing in the end will get sorted out. But we have to show the European Union we're prepared to do this. Nazir is calling from Whitechapel and a new caller to this show. Nazir, hello.
Hi, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening and welcome. So, do you fear this WTO route?
I do fear that, and I would say that for once in your life, just stop being hypocritical. Hypocrisy.
Do you know, Nazir, I've been called many things over the years. I've not often been called hypocritical. So tell me how I'm being hypocritical, please.
Because you've been yourself member of the EU Parliament for such a long time, and now you are asking everyone to leave the EU. And as far as your Jacob Rees-Mogg is concerned, he, of course, set up, he actually moved his own fund business to Ireland just to keep the European access open, whereas he claims that, we'll be better off without EU. Why would he move his asset management business to Ireland if he was better off outside?
Well, it may well be, Nazir, that he has investors to answer to, and because we're part of the European Economic Area, you can choose to pay your corporation tax in any European jurisdiction you wish. He may be doing it to give his investors a better return. I don't know. But I'm really interested, Nazir. You haven't yet explained to me why I'm a hypocrite.
The reason why I say is because, you say one thing and then do completely something. I would rather say you hide the actual fact. So why have you been member of the European Parliament
to
when
expose
you
it?
think European Parliament is such a bad institution?
Well, hang on, Nazir. The SNP take their seats in Westminster, and they want Scotland to leave the United Kingdom.
We're not talking about SNP, we're talking about you, Nigel.
Well, I tell you what we're doing, Nazir. Let's talk about principles. How are my principles, being a UKIP MEP here, wanting to expose the European project for what it is, wanting to get rid of my own job as a group leader and an MEP, how is that different to what the SNP are doing in Westminster?
I'm not talking about SNP, I'm talking about yourself at the moment. So if you don't like Project Europe, why would you be a part of it?
Because I tell you what, I came here to get a voice. I came here to find out what it was all about. I came here to expose it. And I would argue, whether people disagree with me or agree with me, probably they've learned more about the European Parliament through me being here than through virtually anybody else that's ever been an MEP. And I think I've done my job, Nazir, to the best of my abilities.
Realize a lot that how much you can lie. We've always had control on everything that you talk about that we don't. Although the government haven't exercised that control, that's a separate issue. We can blame government for that. But we've always had that control, whether we exercise that or not.
Well, I keep seeing European court judgments and I keep seeing European legislation. Nazir, you clearly want us to stay part of the European Union, but we are going to leave. Do you understand why many of us feel the WTO is necessary? Because we want to get back, Nazir. Do you understand why we want to get back control of our borders, our courts and our laws?
We always had control over our borders.
Oh, right.
We never lost that.
Fine. Thank you very much indeed. 17.4 million of you who voted Brexit. You're all wrong. There was no problem at all. We always had control. Well, you could, in all the years I've spent here, have fooled me. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC. It is now 6:30 and... Do we have to fear WTO rules, or is it nothing to fear, as Jacob Rees-Mogg and a group of senior economists told us earlier on today? And there's no doubt there will be some winners and losers from a big change like this. I actually think if we make it very clear to the European Union that we will do this, we've got no problem with it, they will then chase us down the corridor to have a Canada Plus style deal. I am pretty certain of that. Now today, in Strasbourg, we had a visitor, Viktor Orban. He is the Prime Minister of Hungary, elected earlier on this year with 50% of the vote in the general election. He is an enormously popular leader, but he has stood up against the European Union authorities. He stuck two fingers up to the idea that he would accept migrant quotas after Mrs. Merkel invited so many people to come into Europe. He has closed down a university funded by George Soros on the basis that it was propagating ideas that were against the law in Hungary. Seen by some as a hero, seen by others in Brussels as being a bit of a villain, here was Viktor Orban earlier on today speaking through an interpreter.
I know that a majority will approve the report, and I know that my speech here today will not manage to change your opinion. Still, I have come here today because you are not going to condemn a government, but a country as well as a nation. You are going to denounce Hungary, that has been a member of the family of Christian European nations for 1,000 years. You're going to condemn Hungary, that contributed to the great history of Europe with hard work and shed its blood when needed.
There was Viktor Orban, tough talking. What is it he's talking about? Well, tomorrow there's going to be a vote in the Parliament as to whether the European Parliament thinks Article 7 of the EU treaties should be applied to Hungary. What is Article 7, you ask? Well, it would mean stripping Hungary of their voting rights and, into the bargain, stopping European monies going to Hungary as well. It is
the most radical piece of action that the European institutions can take. Here was Guy Verhofstadt. Remember him? Now, he, of course, is that charming fellow who the European Parliament have appointed as their chief Brexit negotiator. Here was Verhofstadt speaking to Orban.
You're the government of Hungary and the leader of a political party. And Hungary is far more and far more eternal than you are. But my intervention is not to you. Because, and I will recognize it, that doesn't happen often, that the European Union is based on Christian democratic principles, beliefs and energy for decades. I want to plead to you, my Christian democratic colleagues, to recognize that the way Schuman looked to Christianity is in many ways exactly the opposite, as a divisive, narrow and destruction action and opinions of Mr. Orban. So dear colleagues, please for once see that he is the seed of discord that will ultimately destroy our beautiful European project. And please, together with us, stop this nightmare.
Our beautiful European project, you see. Well, this is what I made of the whole thing.
Well, Mr. Orban, thank God there's at least one European leader prepared to stand up for his principles, his nation, his culture and his people in the face of such extreme bullying. Thank God you're there, is all I can say. What is really happening here, Mr. Orban, is they're just updating the Brezhnev doctrine of limited sovereignty. There's no point pretending in this union you're independent. There's no point pretending you run your own country. And Article 7 is the new method of adopting that. Mr. Orban, you keep saying you want to stay a member of this European Union, but it's not just your country that's been insulted today. You've been insulted today. It's time to be more logical. Come and join the Brexit Club. You'll love it.
Well, it was all pretty heated stuff in there today. This big vote tomorrow, and the Parliament will say whether they want Article 7 to be applied to Hungary. And my view, and you can disagree with it of course, my view is that what we're seeing from this European Union with deeper and deeper centralisation is a much more authoritarian nature. You know, you will not decide in your own country what judges you will appoint. We will tell you who is suitable. And you wonder why people now in Central Europe and elsewhere are saying the hell with Brussels. Back to this great debate on WTO. Chequers isn't good enough for the real Eurosceptics. They're now saying there's nothing to fear from WTO. Do you agree? Tony on Facebook says, and he's right, we are not ready to trade yet under WTO rules until tariffs and quotas have been agreed. That's from the boss of the WTO. And you're right, Tony, which means we better get on with it. Roger says, absolutely nothing to fear unless you're the kind of person that fears the wind changing. And Roger, there's a lot of this. A lot of this debate is from companies, here's the status quo, we don't want things to change. But we live in a world where things always change. Fear of the unknown is, I think, one of the arguments that was used all through the Brexit campaign and is still being used today. Let's go to Manchester and talk to Richard. Good evening, Richard. Do you fear WTO?
It's WTO, that's what it must be. I think that, I don't know. I don't think, I know, the Chequers deal is finished. So now we have to take notice of particularly world-class people like you. I don't know what's going to happen with Johnson. Rees-Mogg just speaks the truth. Minford wanders and told us, what have we got to fear? I remember seeing him lecturing 2 years ago. What are you guys fearing? We've nothing to fear. We're a world-class power. And with you, we've got a world-class person leading us. And can I ask you, Nigel, don't go anywhere out of this country until we get out of the EU, please.
I wasn't proposing to emigrate, Richard. I absolutely promise you. I mean, there are many listening to this right now that would like me to emigrate. And there are many here in Strasbourg who'd like it not to be to the European Union. But I'm not emigrating anywhere soon. Richard, you know, I just... What I know is that Chequers doesn't deliver the things that, the basic things that Brexit voters wanted: control of our borders, supremacy of our courts, and the ability to make our own laws. That's what parliaments are for. And if it's WTO, it's WTO. If by saying that we get a Canada Plus style deal, and actually, do you know something? My view, Richard, is if they actually thought the British government said stuff and meant it, I don't think we're that far away in many ways from being able to get a Canada Plus style deal. It's just that Isn't it odd? We've spent the last 2 or 3 decades trying to opt out of parts of the European Union. Now we've voted to leave. Mrs May spends most of her time trying to opt us back into parts of the European Union rather than going for a simple free trade deal. Richard, I thank you for your call, your kind words and your confidence. Pauline says Viktor Orban is a good, strong leader. In a world where there aren't many good, strong leaders, he's certainly, love him or hate him, he's certainly a very strong leader. We're staying in Manchester. We're talking to Neil, a new caller to this show. Neil, hello.
How do you do, Nigel? Good to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So, was Jacob right in saying there's nothing to fear?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the world is going to keep turning. You know, night is going to follow day. I get really frustrated when I'm listening to these naysayers about the, you know, the process of leaving the EU. What they need to understand is that 50% of our trade is already transacted under WTO rules. So I just don't understand why they're so afraid of moving into this new landscape that we're trying to navigate to.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to Felixstowe tomorrow, or let's say Southampton tomorrow, you will see these enormous new container ships coming in from China with huge amounts of product, and it's all coming into our country, and it's going into Rotterdam as well, and it's all coming in on WTO terms. So the idea that life and trade's impossible outside these EU structures is clearly nonsense.
You know, and we need to be making more of the fact that, you know, our export possibilities are much higher. You know, we've seen a reduction in sterling, and people think that that's a negative thing. But for our British exporters, that's a fantastic thing, because it means that we can trade more effectively overseas.
And also, Neil, what everyone forgets here is, of course, that sterling started falling in 2010. You know, against the dollar back in 2010, we were up in the 160s. So this isn't just about Brexit. This is a long-term trend of the pound going down. I agree with you. It's not necessarily bad. Thank you, Neil, for your call. Go to Southwark. Talking to Greg. Greg, do you fear WTO rules?
Not at all, Nigel. Not at all. Do you know what? We should have done... I can't... it's a bit muffled because it's all melting into one now, because I'm a staunch leaver. I did waver originally, but what I would like to say is that let's get over this fear of us going into the precipice, the crevasse. We're not going to get sucked under anywhere. We are a majorly strong country, and we've got a lot of good things going for us. And you know what? We're not going to get sucked into this mire of what these... I mean, I don't want to say Remainers and Leavers, because we've got to, as I've always said, we've got a great country, and we are a massive, massive industry. We will never fail. Look at, we won 2 world wars, for God's sake.
Well, yeah, that was. I mean, that is going back a couple of years, Greg. But no, I mean, Nigel, but I agree with you. Self-confidence matters, you know.
Yeah, we don't have to listen to people that are negative. We just don't have to. There's so much negativity in this country, and it's the fear factor. You've got to have a little bit of faith.
Well, do you know what, Greg? Do you know what, Greg? Rees-Mogg today was trying to introduce a positive note, and he rather agrees with you. We're too good to be a vassal state. Alan on Facebook is not enjoying any of this evening. The only winners will be Rees-Mogg and Farage. The rest of us will all lose. Well, that's Alan's view. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45. The Leavers are uniting around a plan, and they're saying there's nothing to fear from WTO rules. I'm asking you whether you agree with that. But before I do, today is, of course, a very sad anniversary indeed. It's the 11th of September, or 9/11, as the Americans call it, those appalling attacks that we saw on the Twin Towers, and, don't forget, on the Pentagon too. Remarkable story came out today on MSNBC, an American news business channel, reporting on a quote from Donald Trump in a book he published back in 2000.
Trump wrote, "I really am convinced we're in danger of the sort of terrorist attacks that will make the bombing of the 1993 Trade Center look like little kids playing with firecrackers." Trump also mentioned the mastermind of the attack, writing, quote, "One day, we're told that a shadowy figure with no fixed address named Osama bin Laden is public enemy number one, and U.S. jet fighters lay waste to his camp in Afghanistan. He escapes back under some rock, and a few news cycles later, it's on to a new enemy and a new crisis."
That was Trump in a book published back in January 2000. Call him what you will, he's not a complete idiot. He really did foresee what was going to happen on 9/11. Horrible anniversary. I knew lots of people who were killed on that day. Back to the World Trade Organization. Do we have something to fear? Michelle is being positive and helpful. She says, being Canadian, shouldn't Mark Carney advocate a Canadian-style trade deal between the UK and the EU? Trouble is, Michelle, I think he's a full, paid-up Remainer. He loves the European Union. I'd love him to prove me wrong. He won't. Let's go to Hitchin. Speak to Mark. Mark, is Rees-Mogg correct in saying there's nothing to fear?
No, he's absolutely wrong, Nigel, and you know that better than anybody else. We currently do around 55% of our trade through the EU. 43% of it is directly with them. 12% is done via trade agreements they have with other people around the world. Now, what I want you now, hang on. You said it's all about taking back control. Why on earth would I want to go and take that 55% of our trade, which is under the EU, which is democratically accountable through people like you, who are
democratically accountable? You're having a laugh, Mark, aren't you?
No, Nigel, I voted for an MEP, so I know what is democratic and what isn't. Now, just explain to people and your listeners who voted for the members of who run the WTO, who voted them in, how many of us voted for a WTO official, or the people who lead the WTO.
No, we didn't. But our governments
hang on. You said take back control. You said take back control. You're telling me to give my democratic power that I have on the EU to the WTO, which is a private organisation, and it's no longer democratically accountable to me.
Mark, your love for EU democracy is very touching, and Mr Verhofstadt will be pleased to hear it. But of course, as you well know, the executive, the government of Europe, is the unelected European Commission. But before we argue about that, let's just talk figures very quickly, all right? 43% of our trade...
Go on.
You quoted 43% of our trade directly with Europe. But of course, we do also transship stuff through Rotterdam to other parts of the world, which shows as EU trade. So the true figure is about 38%, and it falls by 1% every single year that goes by. So let's not pretend that of our overseas trade, that Europe's not very important. It is, but it's diminishing. The idea we should credit Europe with some success in negotiating free trade deals is for the birds. Switzerland, Singapore, Chile, South Korea have all got far more extensive trade networks around the world than we've got relying on the EU. But Mark, what I want to ask you is this. What is it specifically that you fear? Is it the loss of these trade agreements? Do you think we'd struggle to get them back? I mean, what is it you fear?
Right, okay. Well, I'll tell you what you need to fear, because it's already happening. Back in July, the UK put before the WTO, in general, the terms it wished to trade with the rest of the world. Already, Brazil, America, and New Zealand have raised their objections about what we're suggesting. Now, as one person once put it, the WTO is full of sharks. There are 163 countries who are members of the WTO who can object to any trade plan we put forward. And then that enters into a very complicated legal wrangle, which could stop us from trading. So you saying about the WTO, which is undemocratic, because it's not, I won't have any power over what it does. It's an independent organisation. And you think it's bad trying to organise anything with 27 other countries in Europe?
Mark, ultimately.
163 who have got so much interest.
Come on. Bilateralism is the way forward here, isn't it? That's the way forward for trade all over the world. It's nation states doing deals with each other, not relying on big blocks anymore. Isn't that the reality of the 21st century?
No, it's not the reality of the 21st century. I'm afraid not. There's lots of things that's going to impact us in the whole of this century. But you were asking about WTO and should we fear it? Yes, we should.
Yeah.
It's not a democratic organisation. People who run it have self-interest themselves. You have 163 members who can almost veto any plans we put forward. So yes, it's the worst of all deals to be going down, to be quite honest. And I come back to the point. I have this moment in time, I can't now when we're leaving, I can vote for an MEP. At least I have some...
Yeah, they've got
input.
that. Oh, Mark, they're useless. They're useless. MEPs are useless. Don't think MEPs are important. They're useless. They are not the only parliament ever invented by man, I think, without the ability to propose primary legislation. And Mark, I would say this to you. WTO is not a government. It's a basic set of rules. It may be imperfect, but it is there as a basis for world trade. All right, Mark, deeply critical of the WTO. Let's keep this conversation going. Going to Marcus in Stirling. Marcus, good evening. Some pretty fierce criticisms here of WTO. How do you feel?
Well, I think the majority of people who want a clean Brexit, Nigel, will take WTO rules. Now, Mark, who you had on before, is the type of chap who would take an umbrella with him when it's 40 degrees outside. You know, very negative, can't see the big picture. And the other chap that was talking about the 40% increase in whiskey, I think we're probably less likely to hit the bottle once we leave the EU, so he can put that fiver on whiskey. We would take it. Quality of life, in my opinion, and I think the majority of my friends who are leavers, is more important than the trade tariffs. The other point I'll make very quickly is that we have an opportunity to stimulate our own manufacturing base and to buy British products made by British workers.
Yes, I mean, the idea of a sort of Brexit boom, Marcus, that's what you mean, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And do you know something? Also, the point about the whiskey, the whiskey exporter, is that, of course, whatever tariff gets put on, of course, there is also the question of currency, isn't there? Because things become cheaper or more expensive overseas because of currency movements too. But Marcus, I'm with you. Quality of life does matter, and delivering Brexit matters. A democratic promise that was made. Where do you? I'll tell you what, Marcus. Give me your prediction. Give me your prediction. Where do you think this will all end up?
Brexit, Nigel. Where do I think Brexit will all end up?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Our Prime Minister is a Leaver. Mark Carney is a Leaver. The Speaker of the House of Commons is a Leaver.
No, they're all Remainers, Marcus.
Sorry, Remainers.
God, I was getting very worried for a moment there.
Sorry.
Right, okay.
I was dreaming. I think it's going to end up with something monumental happening in this country. I think it will take action that's something that we have never seen before in this country, because purely relying upon the ballot box, how far is that going to get us, Nigel?
Well, Marcus, I'm not going to advocate. I'm not going to advocate anything beyond the ballot box. But you're right about one thing: we're heading towards some very big, historic moments over the course of the next few months. Thank you. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night at 6. At 10 o'clock tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Nigel.